Hi guys, it's Steph from iDRIVEACLASSIC and today we're back in a car which you probably once remember being all over the roads of Britain, but now, when was the last time you saw one? It's the humble Rover 216. You may know it as the Rover 216 R8 because it was the second one to come along. Now, when these were built, there were 952,000 of these cars, but nowadays there's only 1,000 left, so not only is it quite a privilege to take out an example, but an immaculate example at that, because as we look around this car today, you'll see that even though it's a daily runner, it looks like it's only just rolled off the forecourt. It's an exceptional example, and I'm really excited to show you as well. Now, as always in an iDRIVEACLASSIC video, we're going to look around the outside of the car. We're going to come in, we're going to have a look around the inside, have a look under the bonnet before we talk through the dash. And there's a lot going on in this actually. Feels very advanced for its time, so it's a 1995 car. And then after that, we're going to take the car out for a drive where I'll tell you what it's like to drive and just a little bit about it really. Now, I hope you enjoy the video. For those of you that are going to argue with me that it's not a classic, I'm very sorry to say it's over 20 years old, so it does fall into a classic. However, it is one of the most modern cars we've ever had on iDRIVEACLASSIC. So let's go for a drive out. 90s cars aren't usually my bag, but I'm actually really excited to show you this one today.
Now, the car that we see here today is the Rover 200 R8, but for us to really talk about where that is in the world of Rover and where that sits in terms of history, we need to go back to the original Rover 200 series, sometimes known as the SD3. So, all the way back in 1984, Rover introduced the Rover 200 series SD3, and it was their offering of a small to medium sized family car, and it was that boxier shaped car. Now, if you've watched Keeping Up Appearances, you'll have seen Richard and Hyacinth driving the old style Rover 200. Now, the original SD3 began production in 1984 and was the replacement for the Triumph Acclaim, making it one of the cars to come from the BL and Honda partnership, with the first being the Acclaim, of course. It offered far less variety than the 200 series R8 cars that we've got here today, because on your original SD3 you only got a four-door body with two engine options. You could either pick the 1.3 Honda engine or the 1.6 L series, and for your transmission you would have got a 2 or 4 speed auto and a 5 or a 5-speed manual. Now, interestingly, although it replaced the Acclaim, they did actually badge it as the 200 series, which meant that by doing that, Triumph cars came to an end, making the Acclaim the last Triumph car to ever leave the factory, which doesn't seem that long ago. Now, production ended on the SD3 200 series, and in 1989 saw the launch of the 200 R8 series, which is the car we've got in front of us, and it was a totally new breed of car, offering a big upgrade on the boxier shaped SD3, with again those reliable Honda underpinnings that we'd seen in the earlier model, with a bit of a flair to it. So the 200 series R8, as we're testing here today with this incredibly maintained 216, was launched in 89, as I'd mentioned, and ran on the production line until 1995, making this car we're testing here today one of the last Rover 216s, as it sits on a 1995 M plate. The new 200 series, which we're going to call the Rover 200 R8, is sometimes known as the Mark II Rover 200 as well, and it was put into the market to replace the Maestro. And we'll talk a little bit about the saloon variant, because I know some of you will ask about the 400 series, but the 400 series was drafted in to serve the customer who'd bought the old SD3 200 series car. So this new 200 wasn't a direct replacement for the old 200, which is a little bit confusing. Now, really interestingly as well, while we talk about where this sits and the progression of Rover, although it was actually brought in to replace the Maestro didn't actually stop being made until the end of 1994. Confusing? A bit. However, as many Ford Escort fans will know, Ford did a really similar naming convention trick with the Orion. Interestingly, Rover and Honda had got to grips with how their partnership would work by the point of the Rover R8, because as you'll know, when we took out the Rover 800, we talked a little bit about how that Rover and Honda partnership had a few teething issues because they were producing similar cars side by side, which had done all sorts. It caused unnecessary hassle with heavy costs and a lack of majority shared parts, which causes problems not only on the production line but later on as well. So by the point of the R8 coming to production, both companies knew what the strengths were, which was great. And as well as that, they really recognised how to maximise them to their advantages. Hence why decisions were made like understanding the new K series engine was great for the manual driver, but it only had a manual transmission unit at this point, which meant that for the automatic cars, Rover didn't say, oh, we're going to fight fire and try and get an auto box put out there. They actually made some sensible decisions and said, you know what, financially, it's better to go with the Honda designed engine and box for this. And in fact, many people prefer this on the second-hand market for reliability factor because the K series is seen as a bit of a devil. Now, while Honda excelled at other areas, it was recognised that the strengths of Rover lay in the interior, styling, and suspension. And at this point, Rover were actually getting a lot of things right because good decisions were being made, and the car was designed by a guy called Roy Axe. And you might recognise that name because actually he's got a pretty good automotive CV because not only did he worked on cars at Roots, which I talk a little bit about when we go for a drive, he'd also had a bit of a say at Austin Rover. So he'd had like last minute input on the Montego, and he'd also been instrumental in the design of the Rover 800, which, as you'll remember when we took that out for a test, was a beautiful car, absolutely beautiful. Now, in line with the good decisions being made, Rover didn't try and do anything wild and stuck to what they knew to be true. The new R8 customer wasn't looking for something massively different to what he or she knew to expect from Rover, and yet small and interesting features were woven into the car. The floating roof design with black pillars and a more rounded shape in comparison to the previous SD3 kept it looking really modern, and most importantly, it actually gave Rover a car to fight the competitors with, which had been massively missed out on previous models on things like the Maestro that had come to the market just a little bit too late. And interestingly, the car had to look suitable for both Rover and Honda customers. Although, if you look at the Honda, it is slightly, the lights and a few other bits are different as well. But overall, Rover's styling wins on this because Honda recognised that Rover had those styling credentials which deserve to take dominance. And it also gives you the answer to why it doesn't look massively different from other Rovers of the era. Now, interestingly, although the Honda engine is often preferred, um, it's only because people are convinced, as I've said, that the K series is the devil and it's only ever one journey away from head gasket failure. But at the time, it was actually seen as a hugely exciting step for Rover because although it was only used on the manual cars at this point, the K series had been launched to replace the A series, which had been the go to engine from everything from your Morris Minor to your Maestro. Technology which had been gleaned many moons ago in the 50s from the Austin Morris tie up. The K series was thought to be something of the future and was designed as a double overhead cam 16 valve unit with pent roof combustion chambers, which allowed it to reach a higher specific output whilst retaining a lean burn configuration. Again, this then allowed for lower emissions, which made it a more attractive engine for not only the home market but the global market as well. Now, with all that work that went into the car, it won't surprise you that this car wasn't just an ordinary run of the mill Rover. So, the newly named Rover Group knew that the public understood and respected the existing 200 series, so the new cars were named in the same way, except this time you've got slight variants. So, we talked before about how it had been very much like you only get this and this alone, but the new R8, the new 200 series R8, offered something a little bit different, and also the naming convention was slightly different. So I'll explain that for you in case you don't know. So the 214 was named to reflect the 1.4 K series under the bonnet, and the 216, as we tested today, was named to reflect the Honda 1.6 powered engine under the bonnet. Now, unlike many of the cars we've taken out from the 70s, where I've told you journalists and critics had nothing nice to say, it couldn't have been further from the truth with the R8, because it was really well received for many reasons, including the fact it represented something exciting and new in a market saturated with Escorts, Golfs, Astras, And also, it was really well made and thought out. It lacked that rushed, dated feeling of older cars in the BL lineup, and it quickly took hold as a desirable car in the mid-sized premium hatchback market. The 214, just for those of you that like a few facts, the 214 boasted a max speed of 104 miles per hour, and the 216 boasted a max speed of 120, putting it both above putting it above both the Golf and the Escort in terms of top speed. Although the Escort and Golf were both 0 to 60 in under 10 seconds, whereas the 1.4 took 11.3 seconds and 10 seconds for the 1.6. Although really there's hardly anything in it at all, and it's not something which would have massively deterred the buyer. Again, pricing was competitive too, and your Rover 214 sat way below your Escort Gear and your Golf GTI 8V, both priced at over 10k, whereas the Rover wasn't even 9k. That's £1,000 for anybody watching abroad. The 216 and the 214 were both so well received that the old 213 and the 216 were done away with to accommodate a new saloon R8, which was then named the Rover 400, for those of you wondering how that comes into play. It was priced slightly above the 200 series hatchback models, so if you wanted one, you kind of had to really want one. There was also a Tomcat model, but the video's trekking on. I've got lots to show you today, and I'm also hoping to test one later on in the year, so I want to hold a little bit back. And finally, to finish off, I'll tell you this. The car sold well. It sold around, I said earlier on in the video, 952,000. It was closer to 953,000 during production lifespan, and was even one of the best, I think it was the bestseller actually in 1991, which made it one of the Rover Group's most successful cars. Now, I know many of you are going to tell me it's not a classic, but let's suspend that disbelief just for a minute and give this video a whirl. We often argue a classic is a car which has brought something different, or is a successful model, or something of its time. So although this is kind of really modern, especially for me, it does fit that bill. Now, before we hop inside, I wanted to have a chat with the owner, Matt. So let's have a chat with Matt and find out what he thinks of this amazing car.
Hi, I'm Matt. I own this Rover 216 automatic. This is my 6th R8 Rover. The hatchback is, for me, the more practical version, and the automatic is brilliant for round town motoring, and it's got power steering, which makes it easy to live with as well. They feel like a modern car. They don't rot particularly badly. They're pretty easy to live with. And being the Honda engine, it's quite reliable. You won't get head gasket failure on these ones, so they're pretty easy to live with, and that's why I like these cars. And I think they're recommended for a daily car. They're pretty good, and the features, the electrics or the switches, everything still feels good, even though everything's 25 years old. It feels like as good as some cars that are 10 years old. And the upholstery, the seats, it all wears well. You could see the Honda influence throughout the car. The wood is a little bit old-fashioned. I think a lot of people look at that and think, oh, that's a bit old-fashioned, and they do look a bit old-fashioned outside with the chrome grille. It's a bit of an old hat thing, really, but they just handle very well. It's very easy to live with and very easy to drive. Okay.
But I wanted to walk you through what I, as the driver, am getting to look at and experience as I take this car out. So first of all, for me, it's always about the finishing touches. Now, when I took out the Escort last week, I mentioned I was a bit surprised by the wood trim, but I wasn't entirely surprised on this one, because when I first started driving, I had a Rover 114, and that had a little bit of weird wood tacked onto the front near the glove box. And as you can see on this, we've got the wood going right round from the doors, right round onto the dash as well. And as well as that, we've got a really attractive Rover mat with the Rover emblem in. So as we look round the car, one of the first things that caught my eye was I tend to find that a lot of these 80s and 90s cars, especially when the seats are velour, is the pattern tends to be a bit garish, but this very muted polka dot, as you can see in that really nice grey velour, it doesn't feel A, out of place in the car, or B, too dated. And as you can see on this example, and to be fair, it is a really nice example, it's not stained, it's not sagging, and in my opinion, it looks just as nice now as it did when it came off the production line. Now as we come round, you've got that plastic dash, which again is one of the reasons I don't really like 80s and 90s cars at times, because I think it can feel a bit boring, but it feels very well made. And I think a lot of people tend to say that Rovers are a bit tatty, or they haven't got that finesse by this point in the lifespan of Rover. Now as we come through to the centre console, because by this point controls have started to move on to centre consoles and everything was together. As we start over here, we're going to talk through the heater controls, because you've got a little bit more going on than some of your basic 80s cars, and certainly a far cry from your 70s. So as we go round, we've got your heater controls there, so you can set it to be, well, wherever you want really, a little bit like a modern car. And of course you've got your temperature here, so all the way from cool through to warm. And as well, you've got a 4-speed fan, so unlike some of your 80s stuff, it's not simply on and off, you do get a choice. Now you've probably just spied this down here and you're wondering what this is as well. So this is actually, this decides what you've got. So you've got your air circulating and you've got your fresh air intake as well. And then of course you've got over here, this just controls the vents. So it's in terms of how much is coming out of those vents. And again, your vents just tip and you can move those as well. I mean, you've probably seen this before. Now this is probably one of the only modern bits inside the car that we can see, though some would argue it's not that modern at all. We've got a tape player in here. We've got a few snazzy tapes in the glove box as well. We've got a cigar lighter, as you can see, and over here we've got our ashtray. It's got a few cards in there at the moment, but if you see, we've got this metal bit on here, and that's just to help extinguish anything that's still smouldering when you pop it in. So again, a good little safety feature, but something that people sometimes forget to mention. So looking at it here, straight in front of us, we've got our temperature gauge over here, so we've got hot to cold. We've got our rev counter. Now in the middle, I actually really like this. We've got a central bar running down the middle, which just tells us where we are on that auto box. And over to your right hand side, we've got your speedo, you've got a trip clock and fuel gauge further over to the right. Now you've got a few buttons down here which you've probably spied, and over here you've just got your hazard warning, you've got fog lights, and you've got rear heated screen. And over here, this is just your sunroof button. This is actually great because if you're driving along and it's a bit hot, you can operate that as you drive without having to move your hand far from the wheel. But on your right hand side, under the sunroof button, you've got your mirrors. Now, I mentioned we had electric windows on this, but as well we also have the electric mirrors. So you've got your mirror button down here, and you've simply got left to right and just to move that. And the mirror button, you can press the up, down and the sides just to get that to where you want it to be. So really it does feel like a massive step up from some of the 80s stuff that we've been looking at. Now we've got a coins box over here, imaginatively named coins. Again, as you can see, we've got some coins in there. So these were made until 1995, before that bubble Rover 25 took over. But with this, we are looking at a car which is right at the end of the production, so it should feel dated. It should feel like, well, by 1995 I'm expecting more, but actually I'm pleasantly surprised by what we've got here, and I feel like it would have still held its own even in the mid-90s. It's fantastic. Now, I've slightly gone off tangent. I wanted to show you these electric windows. So as you can see, on the driver's side we have got left and right, so I can operate both myself and the passenger has got just one for himself. Now on your drivers, you've got your, I'm just going to demonstrate those for you actually, so push that down for you, just show you that. So as you can see, it's pretty smooth. Show you those buttons as well in action. Now the next thing I want to show you is the automatic transmission box. So as you can see, number one, it's automatic. Number two, you've got all your so you've got it all there. But really interestingly, and this has been an absolute pain to film, so I hope you can see this at home, as you go through the gears it lights up. But not only that, it also lights up on the dash as well. So let me show you that. What can I say? I'm easily pleased. But yeah, it's It's very nice actually, and what I want to do is give you an honest account of what it's like to drive, because I have been out in some autos and they've been a bit sluggish, so it'd be interesting to see how this performs. Now, a lot of the cars that were sold with autos because of the target audience, so it'll be really interesting to take this out today and see what it's like. It's a 1.6, so I would expect it to be pretty nippy to keep up with traffic, and for reference, the Escort that we took out last week was also a 1.6, so it'll be interesting to see where it sits in line with that. Now, I wanted to show you what this car sounded like when we started it, but it's pretty quiet because I've already started it up and had a listen, because I always like to make sure that you guys aren't in for any nasty surprises. So I'm going to start it up anyway, but what I'm going to do is pop that window down so you can hear it, because it is so quiet, because it falls into that weird category of modern car. Right, let's get it started up. So you hear, even as I rev that car, it's still pretty quiet. Let's go and have a look from the back so you can hear what she sounds like from the exhaust. Now, the comfortable driving experience probably won't surprise some of you, because when this car was designed, it was actually created with the long distance driver in mind. It was for, well, I'm going to say the man who liked comfort, but there were women that liked comfortable driving too. It was for a safer, more sensible driver, somebody who appreciated modern comforts but loved that classic styling of Rover and just loved what Rover had to offer as well. But with this Honda engine, with this lovely automatic gearbox which is doing all the work for me, it really, I hate the term, but it really is a mile muncher. So as we come along, you can really see how this was aimed at your reps, it was aimed at your travelling salesman, it was maybe going a bit further, and it was also going up against that Astra and Escort. But with these, they offered something a little bit more. So of course, they went out, you know, Rover is, you know, Rover's this, Rover's that. But as well as that, you've got some optional extras on these cars, which you couldn't get on your Astra and Escort. You've got aircon, you've got ABS, got all sorts really. But as we drive, you can really feel that it's a massive step on from what you were getting in the 80s. And again, it's so interesting because cars through from the 70s to 80s to 90s, you can see a really marked change through the driving experience, through the handling. But take this out and compare it to a modern car. In many ways, this not only holds up against a modern car, but in my opinion is better. Now, why is it better? First of all, there's less to go wrong, which is always my favourite as a pessimist. Number two, your visibility, all-round visibility in the car is much better, because as you can probably see as we're chatting, the headrests are a little lower on this car than maybe a modern, so probably don't offer the same amount of protection, but realistically, if you're driving an old car, you're probably not as concerned about that as a moderner. And for me, that just makes driving a car feel, well, I just feel a lot more confident driving a car where you've got better visibility as you go. Now, we're taking this out along some country roads, and I'm going to put my foot down. So as you can see, really picks up quite quickly there. So I jumped up from 50 to 60 with, well, no effort at all, to be honest. Now, when I got offered this car, I wasn't particularly excited about it, which is a horrible thing to say, but I thought, you know what, I'm always telling people that cars from the 90s can be classics and they're worth saving, so I thought, actually, I'm going to put myself to the test here and see what I think. And in my opinion, cars like this do deserve to be saved. They're beautiful. Number one, they're beautiful to drive. Honestly, the driving experience in this, I feel like I'm not going to be able to convey it to you properly, but it's such a beautiful car to drive. It's very responsive, and it's really it's a good rival for a modern car if you're not too bothered about Bluetooth and all that other modern nonsense that you get on a finance car. And number two, it's really affordable. This car that you see here today, and as we've looked around, you'll probably notice there's not a speck of rust on it. It's really nice inside. The interior's not looking like a little pack of animals have been living inside it for the last few years. All in all, it's a really tiny car. But guess what? It costs less than £1,000. So maybe for younger drivers that are in their early 20s or in their teens, and they're looking to break into that classic market, this is probably a really great choice to have, because you've got 4 doors, you can take all your friends with you everywhere, you've got plenty of space, but crucially it fits into that classic bracket. And as well, something really interesting to note is that although this is very modern in terms of classic cars, it does actually have an owners club, and quite a good owners club at that. So the 200 and 400 owners club not only are really active in terms of supporting their members, trying to find bits, they've got a great website with plenty of information on, which I have harvested a lot of information off this video actually, so thank you whoever wrote that. As well as that, they attend lots of shows, and it's that real social club experience that a lot of people look for with classic cars but can't really access because they can't afford the classic car of their dreams. Now, as well as that, something which we haven't talked about is the design credentials on this car. So this car was designed by Roy Axe. Now, if that name seems familiar to you and you've watched a few iDriveAClassic videos, it's probably because we mentioned him when we did the Rover 800 video. So when we took out the Rover 800, we talked about Roy Axe because he designed that car, but actually he had quite a bit of design credential already. He worked on the Hillman Hunter, the Hillman Avenger, he had a part in the Sunbeam Rapier, and then he came over to Rover after he left Roots Group, and then once he'd worked his magic at Rover, because in my opinion there's some real magic in this car, so once he'd done all of that, he then got snapped up by Bentley. So yeah, in my opinion it's a really nice car, and it's really interesting to take out because it's not my usual forte whatsoever. As many of you know, my era tends to be 50s, 60s, 70s, but you know what, you don't learn anything about cars unless you stretch yourself, and I feel like I've really stretched myself bringing this out today, but I think there is joy to be found in every single classic car that you take out, whether it's the handling, whether it's the styling. And for me, whilst this car looks quite unassuming in a car park, and you almost look at it and you think, oh yeah, God, I haven't seen one of those in ages, when you get behind the wheel of this, it really, really sells itself. So I think if you are looking for a classic that is going to give you a social club, it's going to give you a reason to go to shows, it's going to give you a reason to get out of the house, but you don't necessarily have that £3-4 grand price budget for a great example of a 70s, 80s or a 60s car, why don't you have a look at one of these 216s? They're a nice car to drive, they've got all the modern trappings, but you've still got that retro vibe when you spot it in the car park. And of course, with so few left on the road, you know that when you walk back to your car after you've done your weekly shop at Asda, you'll go, that's my car. So I really hope you've enjoyed the video. It's been certainly a very different modern experience for me to take you guys out in this. I've really enjoyed it. I know it's a very different car for iDriveAClassic. It's a very modern classic. So yeah, I really hope you've enjoyed it. Now we've got a lot going on. We've got a few more videos coming up soon, so